and disagreements over the expansion of slavery also led to growing political debates, as regional interests often outweighed national concerns. In March 1809, Thomas Jefferson was succeeded by his friend and ally James Madison. Both men sought to end foreign interference in American affairs and to resolve conflicts between American Indians and white residents on the nation's frontier. By 1815, the United States had weathered a series of domestic and foreign crises. Even though Jefferson and Madison both believed in a national government with limited powers, they each found themselves expanding federal authority, especially in response to the tensions with England and the War of 1812. After the war, Democratic Republicans in Congress sought to use federal authority to settle boundary disputes in the West, make investments in transportation, and reestablish a national bank. Federal power was again asserted to settle disputes with Britain and Spain over U.S. borders in the North and the South. More secure borders and state and federal investments in transportation fueled overseas trade and the development of increasingly distinct regional economies. Regional economies ensured economic interdependence, but also political differences. For instance, when the nation's first severe recession hit in 1819, many Southern planters and Midwestern farmers blamed it on the banks. In reality, falling prices for cotton and wheat abroad, as well as overextension of credit by U.S. banks, contributed to the recession. Whatever the cause, the interdependence of regional economies ensured that everyone suffered. At the same time, these economies were built on distinct forms of labor, with the South becoming more dependent on slavery and the North less so. When Missouri, situated between the old Northwest Territory and expanding Southern cotton lands, applied for statehood in 1819. These regional differences set off a furious national debate over the continued westward extension of slavery, tensions at sea and on the frontier. When President Madison took office, Great Britain and France remained embroiled in the Napoleonic Wars in Europe and refused to modify their policies toward American shipping or to recognize thus neutrality. American ships were subject to seizure by both nations, and British authorities continued to impress deserters into the Royal Navy. Just before Madison's inauguration in March 1809, Congress replaced the Embargo Act with the Non-Intercourse Act, which restricted trade only with France and Britain and their colonies. Although the continued embargo against Britain encouraged U.S. manufacturing and the act allowed trade with other European nations, many Americans still opposed Congress using its power to restrict their right to trade. In the midst of these crises, Madison also faced difficulties in the Northwest Territory. In 1794, General Anthony Wayne had won a decisive victory against a multi-tribe coalition at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. But this victory inspired two forceful native leaders to create a Pan-American Indian alliance in the Ohio River Valley. The Shawnee prophet Tenskwatawa and his half-brother Tecumseh, a warrior, encouraged native peoples to resist white encroachments on their territory and to give up all aspects of white society and culture, including liquor and other popular trade goods. They imagined an American Indian nation that stretched from the Canadian border to the Gulf of Mexico. Although powerful Creek and Choctaw nations in the lower Mississippi Valley refused to join the alliance, American Indians in the upper Midwest rallied around the brothers. In 1808, Tenskwatawa and Tecumseh established Prophettown along the Tippecanoe River in Indiana Territory. The next year, William Henry Harrison, the territorial governor, tricked several American Indian leaders into signing a treaty selling 3 million acres of land to the United States for only $7,600. An enraged Tecumseh dismissed the treaty, claiming the land belonged to all the American Indians together. In November 1811, fearing the growing power of the Shawnee leaders, President Madison ordered Harrison to attack Prophettown. With more troops and superior weapons, the U.S. Army defeated the allied American Indian forces and burned Prophettown to the ground. The rout damaged Tenskwatawa's stature as a prophet, and he and his supporters fled to Canada, where skirmishes continued along the U.S.-Canadian border. War erupts with Britain. Convinced that British officials in Canada fueled American Indian resistance, many Democratic Republicans demanded an end to British intervention on the western frontier, as well as British interference in transatlantic trade. Some called for the United States to declare war. Yet merchants in the Northeast, who hoped to renew trade with Great Britain and the British West Indies, feared the commercial disruptions that war entailed. Thus, New England Federalists adamantly opposed a declaration of war. For months, Madison avoided taking a clear stand on the issue. On June 1, 1812, however, with diplomatic efforts exhausted, Madison sent a secret message to Congress outlining U.S. grievances against Great Britain. Within weeks, Congress declared war, although the vote counts in the House of Representatives and the Senate revealed sharp divisions on the matter. Supporters of the War of 1812 claimed that a victory over Great Britain would end threats to U.S. sovereignty and raise American stature in Europe. However, the nation was ill-prepared to launch a major offensive against such an imposing foe given cuts in federal spending, falling tax revenues, and diminished military resources. The U.S. Navy, for example, established under President Adams, had been reduced to only 6 small gunboats by President Jefferson. Democratic Republicans had also failed to recharter the Bank of the United States when it expired in 1811, so the nation lacked a vital source of credit. Nonetheless, many in Congress believed that Britain would be too engaged by the ongoing conflict with France to attack the United States. Meanwhile, U.S. commanders devised plans to attack Canada, but the U.S. Army and Navy proved no match for Great Britain and its American Indian allies. Instead, Tecumseh, who was appointed a brigadier general in the British Army, helped capture Detroit. Joint British and American Indian forces also launched successful attacks on Fort Dearborn, Fort Mackinac, and other points along the U.S.-Canadian border. Even as U.S. forces faced numerous defeats in the summer and fall of 1812, American voters re-elected James Madison as president. While Madison won most western and southern states, where the war was most popular, he lost in New England and New York, where Federalist opponents held sway. After a year of fighting, U.S. forces drove the British back into Canada. Map 4.3. A naval victory on Lake Erie led by Commodore Oliver Perry proved crucial to U.S. success. Soon after, Tecumseh was killed in battle and U.S. forces burned York, present-day Toronto. Yet just as U.S. prospects in the war improved, New England Federalists demanded retreat. The war devastated the New England maritime trade, causing economic distress throughout the region. In 1813, state legislatures in New England withdrew their support for any invasion of foreign British soil, and Federalists in Congress sought to block war appropriations and the deployment of local militia units into the U.S. Army. But the New England Federalists were not powerful enough to change national policy, particularly after news arrived in March 1814 that Andrew Jackson and his Tennessee militiamen had defeated a force of Creek Indians. Important British allies. Cherokee warriors, longtime foes of the Creek, joined the fight. At the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, in present-day Alabama, the combined U.S. Cherokee forces slaughtered 800 Creek warriors. Although some Americans were appalled at the slaughter, in the resulting treaty, the Creek Nation lost 2/3 of its tribal domain to the U.S. and its Cherokee allies.